Welcome to another Burr News Facebook Live interview. I'm Don Burgess. Today I'm here with Nick Kempe from the OBA, who's the Shadow Finance Minister. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you, Don.
It was about a year ago this month, roughly, that you were axed as senator. What was your reaction when you found that out?
Well, my challenge was less about the Senate and more about the lack of communication. I'd been recently elected party chair, and Mrs. Atherton elected as party leader. And obviously, for us to do anything together, we would have had to work in the same vein. And the lack of communication certainly didn't bode well, and also our kind of differences in opinion on how the party should move forwards. Those two things together made it quite clear that staying in my efforts would have been squandered, and I don't think it would have helped the party to kind of breathe life and extend that leadership position.
It's been sort of a tumultuous year for the OBA. How do you feel you guys are set now?
Well, I think there's a newfound energy. I think Craig has managed to kind of re-energize the base and the MPs, and you're seeing a more communicative party, speaking on the issues and this kind of thing, and that silence, I think, was sorely noted in the last year.
Yesterday, the GDP report was issued. What do you make of it?
Well, I think it again showed how much of an uplifting effect the America's Cup had last year. I think the Premier had put a lot of weight on immediate wins, short-term wins with the fintech pursuit, and those haven't played out. Minister Fogo spoke to encouraging signs for next year, but I don't know what data she's basing that on. I certainly hope it's the case, but it would be great if that were shared publicly so that everyone can look at these positive indicators and hopefully kind of set their fears at ease.
One of the criticisms you had was the lower retail sales over the last 4 or 5 months. Why do you think that's important for us to take a look at?
Well, I think it's one of those big economic canaries per se in the coal mine, and when retail spending's down, it's because people's disposable income is threatened or is jeopardized. I think some of the consumption taxes that have been put into place have squeezed that, as well as these new dividend taxes on the small and medium business and job creators in the island has scared the business and value creation local community.
You had a column recently where you were criticizing that, and you said, we haven't done anything really to tax these $1 million making CEOs of the reinsurance company. We've been taxing the middle class. So how would you go about getting more from the richer people and give a break to the lowers?
I think it's less about, we already, as the OBA, put in a progressive income tax, or not income tax, payroll tax, and I think the challenge that the PLP was trying to solve here was a perception. Certainly there's some cases that are reality where there were people that were blurring their income by saying that they weren't employees and this kind of thing, and they were taking it just as dividends. But there's already a notional tax. Now, the payroll tax commissioner has set for certain positions and certain industries what they believe the top salaries should be. So if you're the president of a company of this size, whatever, they reckon this is how much you should be earning in salary. So if you say, oh, I don't work there, I take it all in dividend, well, you're going to get taxed up to that notional salary. And I think that could have simply been enforced. And if there were certain sectors or certain jobs where the government felt that wasn't aligned with reality, they should be adjusted. But by taxing the business operators on the entirety of their earnings, up to the 750 mark or whatever, which is essentially for a small and medium business the entirety of their salary and their company earnings if they're the owner-operator, we've essentially put an income tax only on Bermudian-owned small and medium businesses. And that's kind of the first time in Bermuda's history. Companies that are in the international business space aren't affected by this. Companies that are listed and you have shares in these companies, so that you look at the types of companies that got hit, and it's the people that can afford to invest in third-party companies that are spared, those are usually the wealthiest investors. But if you've created a company, a small or medium company, and grown it to the point that it's successful, you've now had all your incentive removed. You're being taxed at whatever the rate is, but it's an income tax in disguise. And I think that will do terrible things for job creation in the local economy.
Another tax that you talked about was how would you fix working partners being taxed the same as non-working partners?
Well, again, I think they've created this income tax that only hits the people that are doing the work. You know, if I have two silent partners in a company and the company's successful, well, their dividends aren't taxed, but mine are because I'm employed as well. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. They've used a sledgehammer to crack a walnut. I'm not suggesting that there isn't a challenge that can be resolved as people that aren't declaring their income, but there already is a solution. It's called notional salary, and it should just be enforced.
Right. One of the other criticisms of taxes that you have for the PLP is the sugar tax.
Yep.
I noticed that going out and I saw the price of a 12-pack of soda has gone from $14, not on sale, to $17.40 roughly. But I mean all the other sugar items as well. How do you feel like this is an unfair tax?
Well, because any consumption tax is regressive in nature. It's a tax on the poor. The more of your salary you have to spend on consumption, essentially the more of that tax you're eating. If you only spend 20% of your income on consumption, you've now watered down the effect of that tax on you personally, by fourfold. So a sugar tax hits the poorest members of society. Sugar is, from a calorie to price standpoint, usually your biggest bang for your buck. So when money's a stretch, usually those types of foods, let's ignore the health benefits or not, are an easy way to get energy. And so this tax is immediately affecting the poor. And it's just regressive in nature. It doesn't stimulate consumption. It doesn't actually drive the outcomes you're looking for. It's just a money grab.
You're talking about these taxes affecting people, and I know the sugar tax is put in place to try to make us be healthier so that there's less long-term health problems for Bermudians. But with our aging population, another one of your topics that you have, won't we see a benefit from this?
If it actually curbs behavior, potentially, but I don't know if it will. I think it'll just eat up more of people's salary that already consume these types of products. I don't see it being enough to shift people to eat more fruits and vegetables. I don't see there being any subsidy of these healthier substitutes. At the end of the day, we have a challenge with the cost of importing food and everything that gets to this island. We don't produce a lot here. And at the end of the day, when your dollar's stretched, you're going to go for the foods that are the most convenient, give you the most energy for your dollar, this kind of thing. And a lot of times, healthier options are seen as a luxury option. I'm not sure though if taxing sugar in and of itself is a fix. The government spoke about on the floor of the House of Assembly, kind of backpedaling a bit, trying to throw in some last-minute carve-out for small business or entrepreneurs. And I don't. The devil's always in the details. So if you don't import your own sugar, how do you get this duty relief? Some sort of pre-purchase buyback quota scheme with the distributors? When you look at the actual paperwork required for the duty relief, if that's the way it's going to go, it's going to just shift an incredible burden of paperwork onto those people to get this publicized benefit or carve-out.
One of the things dealing with health is our demographic ticking time bomb that we have. You mentioned that nearly 25% of our seniors. The census report highlighted that pretty soon that 1 in 4 people are going to be retired and taking money. How can we fix that?
I mean, the only way we can fix that per se is to increase our working population. Now, if they aren't on island, they're going to have to come from somewhere else, and that's the inconvenient truth that this government doesn't want to tackle. I understand that immigration's an emotive issue, and it's been made even more emotive with political rhetoric and this kind of thing. But I think it was the report said in 2022 the maintenance ratio is going to be like 40%. And that means that the amount of people that are working to support the health care costs and the pension costs and all the other things, the people that are either pre-working age or post-working age, it is going to squeeze what few workers we have left here. And when you add to that the fact that the government spoke to free health care for everyone over 90, I'm curious to see how that's going to be funded. You know, if that's going to be a growing section of our population, there's going to be less people paying into it, how's that going to affect the health care of those people that are actively paying insurance as employees? I'm struggling to see how that's going to decrease the cost of health care.
Right. Now, I just want to be clear. I said taking money, people over 65, it's money that they've well earned through their pensions and things, but there's less people paying into the system.
So it certainly is well earned, but we've created, especially on the government pension schemes and this kind of thing, a structure that's underfunded. When you have systems that are defined benefit instead of defined contribution, you can reverse engineer it, but if it's not done correctly, or if the new people coming into the system is less than those that are contributing than those that are now taking back what they've put into the pot's going to run out of money. I believe the last numbers I saw was that the pension was underfunded by $1 billion or something. I mean, it's a shocking amount of money. The percentage of underfund in that pension fund right now is greater than the underfund that Detroit had when it went bankrupt. Just to put it into perspective, these are shocking underfunds, and it's been the elephant in the room for a long time, and it's an uncomfortable conversation. We're talking huge amounts of money, and sometimes it's hard to make the connection with how that affects me today, kind of thing. Sure, government's paying back $500,000 a day to service our debt. Well, how does that affect me? Well, that's $500,000 a day. It could be going into education, could be relieving some of these taxes, could be subsidizing the healthy foods you were talking about. It's a huge chunk of money that's going to our largely overseas creditors. So that's cash that's going from this island and leaving because we've had to borrow money, because we haven't managed to manage our affairs as an island, and the debt was created, let us not forget, was created in that 2003 to 2010 period when things were going well for the island. Revenue was increasing every year, and somehow we still managed to spend more than we were bringing in, despite getting a bigger paycheck every year. That shows a complete lack of fiscal responsibility.
Although I guess PLP critics would say like the debt nearly doubled under the OBA administration.
And that's a facetious argument. When the OBA came into government, the government was spending some 400 million more than it was taking in a year. So just by inheriting that situation, 400 million was going to be added to the debt. Boom, off the bat, year one. The only way to completely eliminate 400,000 from the expense line was either to raise taxes by an equivalent amount or to cut expense by the equivalent amount. And that would either mean, because most of government expense is payroll, either letting go a lot of people or slashing social programs. Neither of those would have been good for society. So it had to be done through a glide path of expense reduction, as well as some revenue creation. And Bob Richards had set out his glide path, and we were set to have a balanced budget this year. The Premier, even in his election platform, seemed to want to jump on that bandwagon and said the budget would be balanced by 2019. Well, that means by the end of 2018. That's in 2 months. The goalposts and the language was massaged, and it was then said it was going to be in the fiscal year 2019-20. So the goalposts have been shifted back. I struggle to see how these things are going to be met. Minister Fogo said there's excellent news coming next year. I hope so. I'd like to see the numbers. But the retail sales slump and some of these other tax measures make me feel that it's not going to come through government expense reduction. And I struggle to see how it's going to happen.
Now, she did mention that they were looking at raising the retirement age and possible social insurance collection. And I know I had a conversation with the Premier earlier this year, and he brought up the topic, you know, what's your opinion on raising the retirement age and social insurance collection?
I don't see a challenge with raising the retirement age. At the end of the day, people are healthier, they're living longer. Certainly, I'm sure some people that were hoping to get access to their pension funds in the next 12 or 24 months might be disappointed by that. But again, we have this shrinking population, working population. One way to maybe slightly extend that base is to keep people in the workforce for a couple more years, but those are very, very marginal gains at the end of the day.
You said job creating opportunities have been lost. What would you do to help create jobs?
Well, I think the main thing was, and the America's Cup Legacy report that was published by PwC outlined a whole raft of possibilities and opportunities to build on not only the success of the Cup, but the focus on Bermuda and the infrastructure and this kind of thing. And it seems that this government's chosen to just absolutely walk away from anything related to this large sports event tourism, the sailing tourism, the wow and the buzz around the Cup. And I think that's unfortunate. Those would have been some short-term gains. They laid out what was in year 1 to 2, what was in year 3 to 5, and I think there was a hope that fintech would just fill this void immediately. And we haven't seen the jobs on the ground.
Yeah, but what would you do to create these jobs?
Well, I would have built on
the OBA in general.
Well, I think certainly in the immediate term after the Cup would have been to build on those elements that were laid out, building on the sports tourism, building, you know, we haven't had any, for example, we had a whole raft of sailing events here. Now, sure, some people will try and go down to New Zealand because that's where the buzz is, but there's a lot of stuff in the North American and European market where we're a great location for this. But we haven't seen any building on that.
Well, they did create the sports agency to help attract other events here, or the event agency.
I think they said they were going to. I'm not sure if it's been done. The only sports events, big events that we've seen since the election were the ITU triathlon events, which were something that were already negotiated and achieved before the election. Other than that, I haven't seen any big sports events.
One of the other things you talked about was we need to bring the cost of living down. What would the OBA do to lower the cost of living in Bermuda?
I think a lot of our big challenges come down to our residential population. At the end of the day, if the tax base is this big and the expense is this big, we're going to have to squeeze more and more dollars out of the people that are working or the pensions of people who are retired to feed the government machine. That's never going to drive down the cost of living because we're each carrying a bigger burden. If we can get more people on the island who are earning in foreign dollars and spending on the island, all those costs can be shared. And that creates a much easier equation to bring down the cost of living. Certainly from a healthcare standpoint, the OBA had put in the cost assessment of the various government services, scans included, and the gains that were going to be received by that seem to have been reversed with simply paying out to the affected suppliers with, for example, the $1.2 million. I mean, I think these hip went down for the first time under an OBA government, and it's gone right back up again under the PLP.
Surely the OBA recognizes, like, one of the things that the PLP hit you guys for is like wanting to bring in foreigners or guest workers or whatever term you want to use and taking jobs away from Bermudians. How can you
and I think there's obviously nuance in the detail, but bringing in people to take a job that's held by a Bermudian is clearly not beneficial to the economy. But if you have a global company that has an office in Bermuda, an office in New York, an office wherever else, and there's a job that's presently being filled in New York by a New Yorker, and they move that job and that New Yorker to Bermuda, that's a net win for Bermuda. You're taking money that was being earned and by wherever they do their business and spent in New York. That person's paying rent in New York, paying school fees in New York, buying groceries in New York, taking taxis in New York, and now that exact same money that the company's made and they're paying to him as a New York resident would be spent in Bermuda. And I don't view a lot of our foreign or expat or guest or whatever we want to say workforce much differently than we do tourists. If that New Yorker living in New York, that lawyer, comes to Bermuda on vacation and spends 3 weeks at a hotel and spends money on taxis and food and all this stuff, we all say hooray. Now, if that job gets relocated to Bermuda with that employee, I don't see how that's a bad thing. But it's been mixed in a lot with this, and in some cases very substantiated, fear that Bermudians aren't being promoted throughout the workforce. But I think mixing the two messages too strongly makes for an uncomfortable, or it makes it difficult for us to have a reasoned, moderate conversation about the effect of guest workers versus Bermudians not being given the chances for promotion and advancement.
I think it's easy for those of us who have jobs. It's easy to say just bring somebody else in and create a job and get them to work. But if you don't have a job right now and you see somebody else coming in, you can see why there's some resentment.
No, of course, especially, and I can see especially where the resentment comes in. If you're seeing someone being brought in that has the same skill set as you, and or is doing a job you could do for what you believe to be too low an amount of money. But both of those situations, I can see where the resentment comes from, absolutely. But there's also a lot of jobs where someone already has a book of business, has client relations, or has a skill set that maybe there's not enough people in Bermuda to fill. And when those jobs come, they bring nothing but economic uplift to the island.
One of the plans that the PLP are moving forward on is the living wage. What's your opinion on it?
I have no problem with the concept of a living wage. I was on the living wage committee, and I believe if we do it in a way that's based on a statistical numbered approach to find that wage, as opposed to just kind of pulling a number out of the air, we're going to achieve a solution that much more people can understand and can buy into. I think we need to make sure that we're involving the business community as well, so they have some forward planning. They know what's coming down the line. The nuance is going to come in, and again, we talk about the devil being in the details. The nuance is going to come into how our tipped professions dealt with, because right now, if you look at a payroll report, it might only capture their base pay, which doesn't reflect even half or a quarter of their take-home pay when you include the gratuities that they get. So we need to understand that by putting in a living wage that might be above the base pay for a tip worker, it might mean that they're having to give up their tips, and that might not be a situation that they're entirely happy with. Is that the way we want to go? Some businesses give the gratuities back to the employees, others don't. I think we need to spend a little bit more time on the details and how we put it in. But absolutely, I agree that an adult employed in Bermuda should earn enough money to pay for a roof over their head, food in their stomach, and the basic necessities with a 40-hour work week. I have absolutely no challenge with that. My concerns will come in with how it's implemented and if it captures some of the nuances in the situation.
What do you think would be a reasonable, from your you've done the research, you've been on the committee, what do you think would be a reasonable starting point for the minimum wage? I know $12 has been floated out there.
I don't know where the $12 number came from. There are a couple of different models. I believe the number, and I don't want to misquote it, I believe the number was somewhere in the $18 range. Okay. And what it looked at was, what's a basket of goods? An adult needs, whatever, 1,400 calories a day. How much is a kilo of rice? This kind of stuff. How much is a bus pass? How much is a single apartment? So we're not talking luxuries here. We're talking the base the base costs, and it said kind of, will a salary cover these base things? And if the cost of living managed to go down, well, that livable wage would go down too. So we're not talking about a minimum. It's a livable wage. And that's based on a basket of goods that determines what living is.
Right. In Bermuda, what would you think would, I don't want to use the word criminal, but like maybe negligent from a business owner's point of view, paying a person below what dollar an hour salary?
Yeah, well, I think that's, you know, and it could be simply a position where they don't know, and the money in the company doesn't have to give it. I can't speak to business owners' own opinions, but certainly I think that, you know, if you're working full-time in a company, you should have enough to live with. Absolutely. Should there be some carve-outs for children that are working and still living at home and don't have the same basket of costs as an adult does? Sure. It's a way to get entry-level work and otherwise it's tough for young people to get a foothold and get experience. So sometimes that slightly lower wage or that carve-out for the youth is needed. I think where we find a lot of challenges is in some of those, usually the target industries that are the cause of the most concern, or where there's a lot of seemingly underpaid workers from overseas that are coming in, and they're able to distort their basket of goods, their cost level, by, you hear about the hotbed scenarios and the, you know, but by living in much more shared accommodation, that kind of thing, you're essentially able to reduce some of your expenses on living and that kind of thing.
Well, I have a friend who works at the bank, and the person was telling me that, you know, they've registered 10 people to work for this one company at the same housing address in Devonshire.
Yeah, you know, and that to me seems like it might be a living wage for those workers compared to, or even just because the accommodation shared. I think we need to look at it, you know, but until we can have that open, reasonable conversation about what drives these costs, how it's going to be calculated, where the challenges are. Again, we've got a shrinking workforce, and not everyone wants to do every job. Sometimes it's simply because of the pay, other times it's because of the hours or because of whatever else. You know, I mean, I worked nights at a hotel before. Not my preferred job. As soon as something else came along, I walked away from it. And you know, we need to find some balance here. We need to make sure that not only our people are being protected, and that people are able to, fully employed, have a life that, you know, keeps them sustained. If they then want to travel, do more, sure, then second job should be something that's promoted. But it shouldn't be that you're needing the second job as a, say, single adult with you know, modest consumption, and you need that just to get by. I don't think that's something we should be endorsing as a society.
What lessons can the OBA take from their election loss last year, and how can you guys change going forward?
I think we need to have more honest conversations about you know, not just the revenue creation side, but also how we address the underlying and very real challenges that a lot of people have. You know, Bermuda is an expensive place to live, and glossing over that, I think, does us all a disservice as a society.
Yeah. It seemed like to me, and I'm not party to the inner workings of the OBA, but a lot of times the OBA seemed to be missing on the optics of situations and not realizing how people were feeling.
Fair enough.
Up to, you know, the PLP's been in power now for just over a year. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate them, and why?
I mean, I think for the large part, the economy's kind of been moving forwards. There haven't seemed to be any massive missteps, but there also haven't been really a vocal opposition pointing out where things could have maybe been done differently and this kind of thing. I commend the Premier for trying to diversify the economy. I struggle with some of the bold promises surrounding fintech, and I think we're now seeing the government backpedal a bit on some of these promises and these expectations that were set for Bermuda. Knowing that delivering on that might not have been as easy, I would have liked to have seen some building on some of the very positive America's Cup legacy. All in all, I guess a 6.
A 6. For you, going forward, and now that you're back in Senate, how do you feel your role as trying to be, a lot of people get tired of partisan politics, you know, people tune out. How can you stand for the OBA and yet at the same time show collaboration with the government?
Well, for me, I got into politics first off because I was kind of discontent with economic policy. That's kind of where politics interests me intellectually, and I will try and be fair and look at it from a numbers-based standpoint. If there's things that I agree with, I'll certainly support them, and if there's things that aren't, I'll try and point out where I think it's not right. If there's what I think are intentioned misinformation being put out, then yeah, clearly then I'll make a stronger statement. But I've tried to not just spout a partisan line for the sake of it, but speak kind of my truth from hopefully from a fact-based standpoint.
We always try to end with something light or begin with something light. Tomorrow's Halloween. As a child, what was your most memorable Halloween? What were you dressed as, and why was it memorable?
Memorable Halloween as a child? I'm not sure. 2 years ago, I dressed up as.
Were you a child 2 years ago?
No, I can't remember my Halloween costumes from then. 2 years ago, I dressed up as something I thought was scary and fake, which was a President Trump. Unfortunately, that's moved from the realm of fantasy nightmare to real nightmare. So it's I'm not sure if I'm willing to dress up as something scary this year, lest it come true.
Okay. I'm Don Burgess. I'm here with Nick Kempe, the Shadow Finance Minister of the OBA. And as always, we appreciate you tuning in and listening to us, and we hope you have a beautiful afternoon.
Thanks, Don. Thanks, Dennis.